Okay?
Mm-hmm.
This is September 23rd, 1990. We're sitting in Peoria, Illinois, at Grandma Rhea's condo in 906 West Laurie Court. I'm sitting with Grandma Rhea Bork and Aunt B. Kaskowitz, who lives in New York, Grandma's sister, and we're going to give you some history of the Kaskowitz family, the Bork family, as much as we can remember, and as much as knowledge that we have at this time. So I'm going to step out of this picture. By the way, I'm Norman Bork. I'm Rhea Bork's oldest son. Okay?
I was born
Speak up.
3 days before Rosh Hashanah, 1904, in Ostrowie, Poland.
Suburb of what?
It was on the Russian border, and
It was close to Warsaw.
it was, well, no, it wasn't close to
Ostrowie.
it was Ostrowie, Poland, and it was on the borderline of Russia and Poland. In turn her off for a second, can you? Okay. In 1912. And my name in Europe was Kaskowitz. And when I came to Ellis Island, they couldn't make anything out of the name. So they signed me in as Kaskowitz. And my name in Europe was Rivka Middle. And when I came to America, I didn't like the name of Rebecca. Well, it wasn't that I didn't like it, but I had oodles of cousins, and they were all called Rebecca. So when their mothers called Rebecca, we never knew which one they wanted. And it seemed to go against my grain somehow or other. And so I couldn't change my name while I was going to public school because I was registered as Rebecca. But when I went into high school, I shortened the name to Rhea. And I told all my friends that if they called me Rebecca, I would not answer them. My name was Rhea. And gradually they got accustomed to calling me that. And when I entered school, public school, I was 7 years old. And of course I had to go to the first grade until I learned English, and slowly they advanced me until I was in the proper class at the proper age. And can I say, where am I going?
Well, what public school did you go to?
I went to PS 42,
In New York.
and then when I was in high school, I went to PS 62. And should I start
Yeah.
this? This is a picture of my mother and myself from Poland. I presume I was 4 or 5 years old. I really don't know. And
Your mother's
name was Silva, Sarah in English. And my father was Buman, Benjamin. And we lived on the Lower East Side at 199 Division Street. And he had a second-hand clothing store. He repaired old clothing, and the buyers were from the South, and they bought the clothes for the colored people that worked out in the fields with him.
Also, he sold to Canada.
He sold to Canada also.
Yeah.
And I lived of the East Side, more or less all my life until I met my husband.
What did you do in between? You worked as a milliner.
Well,
Worked for an uncle.
I was a milliner on the millinery line, and I don't know how to go on.
Well, just talk about what you did. You worked for your uncle.
I worked for my uncle on hats with trimmer as a trimmer, and I worked with him until I met my husband.
Okay.
And
That was when?
hold it a minute.
Please, that you
Yeah.
can eat off her floors.
Now, where did I leave off?
Well, you
Well,
can pick it up at any point. You
Pick
can
it up just right.
Just keep talking. He's
just-
running.
oh.
Just keep talking.
Grandma was a very fat woman,
Short.
short, but her house was very immaculate. She would wash her own, all the clothes by hand on the washboard
In the
in the
bathtub.
bathtub, and if she got overtired, she just leave things as they were and lie down on the bed for an hour and rest, and then stand up and continue until she finished. So her house was always perfect.
Now, this grandmother was on which side?
My father's mother, my grandmother, okay? My memories of my grandfather are a little vague. I just remember that at the end of the day, he was a peddler. All right, so it was, small change. At the end of the day, I was a very small little girl. He would sit at the table and roll those pennies into rolls of dollars, separate the pennies, nickels, dimes, and I would stand by the table. Maybe I was 3 years old, and I would stand and look, and I was very timid and very shy, but I wanted a penny. It took him a long time for him to decide to give me a penny, but he did. He did. And that's about all I can tell you, memories of them. But they were a loving pair,
Okay, now talk about Grandma Sarah.
Huh?
She was a great cook.
My
Grandma
mother,
Sarah.
my mother, was a great cook. The best thing she could cook was noodles and gefilte fish. That's the rest of the meal, forget it. And my husband was my second cousin. And I did
May I
not,
interrupt?
yes,
Again, you're skipping a second about him. He had a terrific personality. He was uneducated. He knew how to daven. I don't know what kind of an education he had in Europe.
he didn't have any,
I wasn't there. I don't know.
except for Jewish.
But he was a very
Hebrew.
hard-working man, and he, in his business, was also his social life. I mean, he sat in his store working day and night, never stopped. But in the interim, people would come in, he would sit down and talk, and everybody loved him. He had a younger brother, my Uncle Abe,
Yeah.
who was a boy that had gotten a college education. He was Americanized, and they were at the opposite ends of the pole,
He was the youngest one. My
Yeah,
father
well,
was the oldest.
That's what I said. But this American boy and this European man were very close. It was hard to understand. There were 4 brothers.
Yes.
Of all
One
the
sister.
and one sister. Of all the other brothers, Abe only related to my father.
Well, name the brothers and the sisters.
There was Uncle Saul, Uncle Sam, Uncle Julius, Aunt Mamie, and Uncle Abe. So every Friday, even though my Uncle Abe was a very busy person, he was an accountant, but every Friday he would come down and visit my father, spend an hour or two, see how he was getting along, whether he was short of money, what could he do. And when he was satisfied, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm sure he helped him a little here and there
Yeah.
whenever my father needed it, then he would leave. But this went on throughout their lifetime. They were very, very close. And every Saturday night, my mother and Rhea and I would go over to their home in Brooklyn and babysit. At that point, I enjoyed listening to the radio. I didn't have one. To me, this was luxury. And I would take a bath every Saturday
You know,
night.
we didn't have the facilities as handy as they did.
That's right. And I loved babysitting. I loved their children. They had two little children, Shirley and Larry, at that point. To me, it was the highlight of the week, see. And that's the way the years rolled along.
They would come down and visit every weekend, bring the children, and we used to take care of them, and they would go out. And then they would come back and pick them up asleep and put them back in the car and go back home.
And I will say that my Uncle Abe started me out in life. If not for him, I would not be where I am today.
So that goes for me too.
Absolutely not. I'll tell you how it came about, shall I?
Yeah.
Sure.
When I went to high school, I took the general course hoping that I could go to college. And of course, I couldn't. It was, I think, just when the Depression hit us, and I knew I'd have to go to work. So when I got out of college, I went to business school for a year and took bookkeeping, stenotyping, all that. And I went out and tried to get a job, and of course there weren't any. If I didn't have experience, I certainly couldn't get any. So I did whatever I could. I got a job in a factory filling 5-pound Epsom salt boxes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I was a skinny little girl, 17, you know. And as the day went along, those 5 pounds became 5 tons. I was very tired, and I was just, you know, gritty from the Epsom salt, and I looked a mess. And my Uncle Abe had a client in the building. So one day he stuck his head in to see where I was working, and he got sick. So he came over to me, he took me by the hand. He said, "I'm taking you out of here." So I pulled back. I says, "No, I need this job." I was making $7 a week, and it took me a long time to get that. I says, "No, I am not giving up this job. I can't get another one." He says, "You're not staying here." He says, "Who's your boss?" I says, "That man." So he started to drag me over to his boss, and he said,
Sorry.
and he said, "Pay her off. I'm taking her home." So, of course, they didn't care. They gave me my few dollars, and he took me outside, and he said, "You're going to work for me. You'll come into my office, and I'll teach you bookkeeping, and I'll see, you know, how much further you can go. I'll pay you $3 a week." I says, "But I'm making $7 a week." He says, "Well, at this point, this is all I can do for you." So I went home, and I told my father, I says, "Here I'm making $7, and he's going to give me $3. It's really, you know, not so good." So my father said, "Now you listen to me. Make believe you're going to school. Uncle Abe is going to teach you. And whatever else he'll give you $3. If you need any more, I will give it to you." I knew that wasn't going to be. So I stayed with my uncle for a year, at which point he raised me to $5. And I went to City College at night at the same time. Oh, besides, I overlooked one thing. I worked for him 3 days a week and 2 days a week in a factory to have a little bit more money. And that's how I went along for the year. And at the same time, I went to City College at night, and I studied accounting and bookkeeping and business law. And it was too hard for me. I couldn't handle that big a workload. It really was too hard. So after a year of college, I stopped college. And I left my Uncle Abe after I'd been with him for a year and a half. And I went out and I got a job for $15 a week. And then I got another job for $25, $38, $50, $72, $77, all the way up. Year in and year out, I just moved up. But my Uncle Abe started me.
He took care of both of us.
Yeah.
He saw to it, you know, that we,
And if anyone has anything to say about my Uncle Abe, he was the type of man that was a screamer. He yelled. He was very nervous. But he was very capable and very caring. And when people realized that, they loved him. He would walk into a business, and if he saw that it was floundering, he would buy in and make it prosper. He founded the Marine Park Jewish Center.
you know more about him than I do.
He was very active in the Knights of Pythians. He was very active in the veterans. He was very civic-minded, and if anyone had a problem, I mean, he was just the man they would go to. He would yell at them, but he did what he had to do, you know? And of all my uncles, this is the man that I respect and that I love, and I pay homage.
Leave it.
I don't know where to go.
You met Dad. You got the picture there, your wedding picture.
I met my husband in 1926, and we were married in 1927. Our courtship was mostly by long-distance telephone, because he lived in Peoria, Illinois, and I was in New York, on the Lower East Side.
Did you have a phone in the?
Huh?
Did you have a phone where you lived?
A phone?
Where you lived in New York, did you have a phone?
No. My neighbor upstairs had a telephone, and I had access to it every time I wanted to, and my husband would call me long distance, and then she would call me to come up and talk to him on the phone. That was our courtship for a whole year, until he came back to New York, and we got married in 1927, and we were married at the bedside of my grandfather, who was very, very ill, and he was at that time at the end of his life, and he couldn't talk, and he made motions that he wanted me to get married right by his bedside, and that was our wedding at that time. And then we left. Well, we didn't leave together. My husband left Peoria, and then my parents brought me a week later to Peoria.
They were looking for the Indians. The Indians.
The year
Indians.
Indians running around on the in Peoria, on the streets of Peoria. So she came along for protection. She was going to protect me from the wild Indians running around in Peoria. And but I was very, very happy to leave New York. I never enjoyed living in New York. And I had a girlfriend, Sadie, that always went to fortune tellers to have her fortune told, and I didn't believe in it. And she insisted that I go along, and after she had her fortune told, the lady, the gypsy, said, "Sit down, I'll tell you your fortune." And I told her I don't believe in it. And she said, well, anyhow, she says, you're going to move over water, and you're going to live in the West, or whatever she called it then, I don't remember. And when I walked out, I thought to myself, well, over water will probably be over the Brooklyn Bridge, and I'll be living in Brooklyn. But the way she prophesied it really came true, because I moved over water to Peoria, Illinois.
Over the Illinois River.
And that's where my life really started. I loved the town. I loved my in-laws. They were like a mother and father to me. They guided me, and I listened to them because they were down-to-earth people. Lived with them for 6.5 years, raised 2 children, Paula and Norman. And then when I was ready to have my 3rd baby, we moved into our own home. And where do I go from here now?
Well, you can talk about a little of the history of the Bork family as much as you know.
Is it?
Yeah, talk about the Bork family and what you know, how they keep...
Sister, and she lived in a 3-room little apartment on the Lower East Side. And
Jackman Street, Brooklyn.
no. I went to Clinton Division. That's before your time.
Yeah.
And he,
I didn't know he had a sister.
huh?
What was her name?
Hailib
That
was
was
a
our-
sister. That
Oh.
was my grandmother.
Okay.
And he knew he wanted to, he wanted work right away because he left a wife and 2 little children in Europe, and he had hoped of bringing them. And so he went to work in a bakery shop, and he got permission to sleep there near the oven or on top of the oven. I really don't remember the story. But that went on for a short while, and he knew he was really not going to get anywhere because all he had in his mind was he wanted to bring his wife and 2 children to America. And so he picked up a paper one day, and he saw that they were building the fair in St. Louis.
St. Louis Exposition of
Huh?
1900.
Yeah. And he applied for the job. And he went to St. Louis and worked building the fair. And then from there,
He was a stonemason.
yeah, he was a stonemason.
That's what he did in Europe originally,
Yeah,
right?
originally.
And how big was Great-Grandpa Isaac?
Grandpa Isaac was over 6 feet 3 or 4 inches tall. And so when he got through with the fair, he took a job
On the
as a
steam.
stoker on the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
Mississippi River, and he was sitting on the levee waiting for coal to come, truckload of coal to come, so they can
That
fire.
was at Keokuk.
Huh?
That was at Keokuk.
Keokuk, Iowa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Waiting for the coal to come so they can stoke up the ship that he was working on so they could continue. And he was stripped down to shorts or whatever, with no shirt or anything, and he was real black. He almost looked like a colored guy. And he was sitting on the levee waiting, and he got a hold of a Jewish paper, a Forvitz, and he was sitting there reading that paper, and a man was walking by, going somewhere, and he looked at this man who he thought was colored, and he sees him holding a Jewish paper, so he got curious because he thought maybe, he was holding it upside down or what, and he finally said to him, do you know what you're reading, or something to that effect? And he said, sure, he said, I'm a Jew. He says, so this man said to him, what are you doing here? He said, what are you doing here? He says, I work on the ship. And he said, what kind of a job is that for a Jewish man? He says, do you know a better one? He says, sure. He says, I work I go from farm to farm during the season now and work on the farms, and then from one farm I go to the next one, and he says, and that's how I earn my living. And he says, do you think I can get a job too? He says, sure. He said, come on. So he went on board the ship, and he got his money and a little knapsack over his back, and they walked across the Mississippi River, and there was a German town there, farmers, and they went in. They were glad to give him a job because he was a great big heavy guy, and when he got through working, he came in for his breakfast because they started real early in the morning. It's very early, and everyone was. He sat down at the table to eat, and all he was eating was just the vegetables. He wouldn't touch the meat because he kept the Jewish religion. And this German woman noticed, and she knew all about his religion and everything, and she says, Herr Bork, she says, why don't you eat the meat and everything? He says, well, I'm a Jew. She says, okay. She says, then you sit on the other table and I'll know what to feed you. And she used to feed him everything but meat, you know. And then she let the other farmers know about him and what they should do for him, and he went from farm to farm to farm until he acquired enough money. And he sent for his wife and his 2 children, and they landed in Keokuk, Iowa. And from there, he went to a scrap dealer. There was a scrap dealer there in town, and he would load up his wagon. I don't even remember the detail very much, but he would have him go from farm to farm and buy, you know, certain things and bring back, and then he would sell it to the farmer, and this farmer was robbing him.
No, the scrap man.
The scrap man was robbing him. So he made acquaintances with some people from a plant that supplied groceries to the stores.
Laga Messina.
Yeah. Laga Messina?
Laga Messina.
Laga Messina.
They're still in business.
Yes, they're still, and then they told him, you know, that he shouldn't have any business to do with a scrap man because he wasn't an honest man, even though he was of our faith. And he said, so he says, well, what should I do? He says, I'll tell you what to do. He says, I will load you up with potatoes and groceries and everything, and you go from farm to farm and sell them, you know, groceries, and then you buy their furs, their hide and everything, and you come back to me, and in that way, he ended up finally owning a grocery store, and this man from the Laga Messina loaded him with groceries and potatoes and everything, and that's how he got started.
Well, stop it. She didn't that, you know.
Yeah.
And then how Grandma, you moved to Ottumwa because Grandma wanted a bigger Jewish population. They didn't stay there very long.
No, they didn't.
And then they
went
moved to
back.
Peoria.
Yeah.
And then, you know, when they came to Peoria, the first night they spent in Patty's grandmother's house.
I heard a different side of it. I don't know what would happen to his boys. He didn't want them to not be living in a
Grandma
Jewish,
Fanny was concerned too.
whoever. They didn't want them to be in a Gentile environment. He was afraid they would grow up and marry Gentile girls. It went against his grain. So by that time his little store was prospering, and I don't know how he found out about Peoria. I don't know that.
Well, I think they heard there was a bigger Jewish population.
Yeah, right. So one day he said to his wife Fanny, I'm going away for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me interrupt here. I know how he found out about Peoria. There was a Jewish, Swedish man that used to come into Peoria because all his friends lived here. And when he came back one day, he told Grandpa Bork and all about Peoria, and he says there are there's 400 or 500 Jewish families living there. There's a synagogue and everything, and he says, I don't know why you're staying where you're at now, because you don't permit your children to go with Gentile girls, and they're ending up sitting with us at this drugstore where they used to play whist. And he said, that is no life for your children. And he says, so with that, Grandpa Isaac decided that he is going into Peoria and look it over. And he came into Peoria in 1921, went to the synagogue, looked around, got all the information, and decided that this is where he was going to stay. He never went back. He never went back to Keokuk, Iowa. He just called up his wife and he says, sell out everything, get into the car, and come to Peoria. He says, no,
Bork, that you're omitting.
Go ahead.
As I heard the story, Grandpa Bork came into Peoria, and he started to walk around the town to look at various business enterprises, and he was walking by the scrap iron business, and he saw that it was a very busy business. So he just sauntered in casually and asked who the owner was and struck up a conversation, and he told him the truth. He said he was here hoping that he might be able to settle here and go into something where he could earn a living, and what was the potential of this business? Was there room for another business like it? And the man was a little open about it, gave him a little information, and then he walked around some more and he saw another scrap yard, and he had a feeling that he would be suited for this. And then he was very smart. He went to the bank. I mean, this was a very smart thing of him to do. And is that true?
I don't remember what you're talking about.
A lot with a house, and he sent his wife a telegram telling
No,
her.
he didn't send her a telegram.
Well, he
called
notified her, whatever
I know
he
they
did.
did. I
He
know they came
notified her.
with a Dodge truck. I remember Dad telling
Okay.
me.
Yeah.
Or they loaded up everything in a Dodge truck.
Well, he came to Peoria looking around after the Swede told him that there was a synagogue and there was, everything that he wanted in Peoria. And he says, here, you don't let your children live. He says, you should go to Peoria. He says, I've checked it all out. I have Swedish friends there, and I go there all the time. And so Grandpa came to Peoria, and he looked around, and he bought this lot on the south side.
Right.
And he called, I don't know whether long distance or whatever, he called them up, and he told them to sell everything, pack everything that they wanted to keep into their truck, their Dodge truck, to come back to Peoria. He's found a place, he's going to start a business, and they should just, come on ahead, because he wasn't going back to Keokuk, Iowa anymore. They'd have to come this way. And that's how he got started in the scrap business. He bought this lot, he put a fence around it, and he went out peddling, from place to place and letting people know what he was going in for. And that's how I, Bork and Son, got started. Better turn it off so I'll know why we're... This is Grandpa Mike. At the age of 16, he enlisted in the Army, in the cavalry, and he told them he was 18 years old. And he served on El Paso, on the border of Mexico. he was there for about 3 years before the First World War One.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was wounded there.
Yeah.
So he fought with Pancho Villa.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
He was at Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas.
He was in Fort Bliss at El Paso, Texas, and he served with Pancho.
No, he chased Pancho
He
Villa.
chased Pancho. I've got the information all wrong. He chased Pancho. Pancho who Villa?
All over the border down there.
He was very good at the horses, right?
But General Pershing. General Pershing was his commanding officer.
General Pershing, I got this all right. General Pershing was his commander, and then he served in the First World War One
Yeah, in Europe.
in Europe. And when he came back, what about him when he came back? I tell you.
Well, he went back to Iowa and then
Went back to Iowa, and then they all moved to Peoria in 1921. That's where they started Rhea Bork and Sons Scrapyard. And where do I go?
What did Grandpa do? He didn't go immediately into the junk business, did he?
Huh?
well, he peddled.
Grandpa Mike peddled,
Yeah, Grandpa Mike,
but he did not go into business with Grandpa Isaac at the time, did he?
no. He went into business by himself then, because Grandpa had retired.
Grandpa Isaac had sold the junkyard
Yeah.
for what back
I
then?
have no idea.
For some reason, 17,000.
Sam Bork could probably fill us in on that.
And Grandpa Isaac had sold the scrapyard, and then Grandpa Mike, when he married you, had to find a living, and
Yeah,
that's
so
when he
he
came
went-
back to Peoria and started peddling
Is
the
it on,
business.
are they,
Mhm.
is your voice recording
Yeah,
that?
we're
That's
recording
right.
right now.
Yeah.
And he had started the
The wrecking yard and the little auto parts across the street. Sam Herman came in the
After
in,
he
in
married Rhea.
about
I don't know all that
1943,
stuff.
43, 44. Somewhere in the early 40s.
I don't know. Just don't remember.
What was the name of the people that bought Grandpa Isaac out originally?
Mansfield.
Mansfield.
Yeah.
And did they not complain about Grandpa Mike taking business away from him because he was?
Well, they had a
Well,
lawsuit.
not Grandpa Mike. They complained about Grandpa Mike.
But he
taking-
said he did not sign a no-compete clause for his
Yeah.
son.
So Grandpa Isaacs then bought the Mansfield out, and he went in with my husband. They started their own business all over again.
They walked. Grandpa Isaac said, "Wouldn't you like to be in business with me?" And they walked in and said, "This, how much is in this pile? It's half." And that's how
Yeah.
they restarted it again.
And they started again, yeah. Oh, I just don't remember. And every time Grandpa Isaacs would go in, he used to pay him monthly, you know, the interest and all that. And every time he'd go in there, Mansfield was crying he was losing money. Because your grandpa was already in the scrap business. He had a little yard in 1400 block across from your grocery store. And so Grandpa Isaac said to Mansfield, he said, I don't want anybody to be losing money on a deal that I, had with you and all that. And he says, every month, he was crying, he's losing money because of your dad being in the business. So he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. He said, I'll buy you out. And that's what he did. He bought the business back from Mansfield. And then he came in to our small yard, and he said, how would you like to go into business with me again, to your grandpa? So he said, okay. He said, I bought our business back from Mansfield. So he said, okay. So he went around, he says, this pile's worth this much, this pile's worth this much, this pile's worth this much. He ended up with $17,000 profit. And that's when they went back to business together again. Of course, Grandpa Isaac didn't work that hard. He came in at odd hours or anything because, you know, your dad was running the business. But that's how they started back again. And they bought the place across from, what was that place across from your mother? Neighborhood house.
Huh?
The neighborhood house.
Right.
Yeah. And that's when he bought that yard at 1400 block, not 1400, across from the neighborhood house.
20,
Yeah?
2000 block.
Yeah. And he put a fence around it.
So where was the first location of the scrap yard?
Yeah, and
1410 south.
that,
1414 south Adams,
That was across from the.
where Hoken is, where Hoken had the plumbing supply. Right across from
Yeah.
Patty's
No.
grandparents had a grocery store at the corner of Lincoln.
you know where Lincoln crosses
Lincoln and
and Adams?
Yeah.
Well, when the one street that went into Lincoln,
What could do this
right
with my thing?
right below that, Patty's grandparents had a little grocery store, and it was across from our yard. So when we went into business back again with Grandpa Ike, they opened up across from the neighborhood house, and it had a brick house on the corner. They fenced it in, and that house, there was a room in the back, and there was some rooms upstairs. So Grandma Fanny and Grandpa Isaac lived up there for a while until, you know, things got going better, and then they moved away from there.
What year did Charlie Alexander get into it then?
Charlie Alexander got here, I don't know when. Can't
Well, when
remember.
did they get married?
When he married Jeanette. He was a salesman
Oh, shoot.
of silk fabric, silk shirts, some stuff he was selling, I don't know, in Chicago. And when they got married, Grandpa Isaac said, you know, asked him what he was doing, I don't know, this and that. And he says to him, why don't you come down and go into the business with us? That's how he got started. So he moved down here and
What year?
I really
Well,
don't know.
Jeanette got married when, at 30, 29 or 30,
That you'd have to ask
Oh,
Jeanette.
that.
28?
I don't remember. She was married, wait a minute, she was married a couple of years after I was married.
So 29.
Well, she'll tell you when you get home.
That you have to get from her. And so from a silk salesman, we became a scrap dealer.
I want to figure out how many sisters she had, girls.
Was there seven?
Well, I
Six.
counted it. There was Chava, Shana, Sylvia,
Neche,
Neche, Jente,
Jente,
and one in Europe that I don't
Freda,
know.
Freda.
6, and Mama 7. There were 7 girls. The one in Europe, I had an inkling, but
I'll see in a minute.
I want to talk about the 6 about the 5 in the United States. And I want to tell you how 2 came here.
It's
Go ahead.
Go
Oh,
talk.
Just go ahead.
Well, after my father brought my mother and Rhea to the United States, and I don't know just how he was making his living when he first came over, but ultimately he went into the second-hand clothing business. And
He had a candy store when he first came over.
right, all right, you see, you know that part better than I. Okay, and then he went into the second-hand clothing business, and I think from after World War I, between 1918 and maybe the middle 1920s, were his prosperous years, where he made his most money. And he owned a 5-story building with a partner on Livonia Avenue, and my grandmother and grandfather lived on the ground floor, and I guess they looked up after the building a little bit. Then he decided that the area for his business was on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. that was when he sold his share of the big apartment house and took that money and bought the building on Division Street. He paid $12,500 for it. And he did well for a while, but like towards the late 1920s, understandably, his business was, going down. First of all, there wasn't a market anymore for secondhand clothing. People were making money and they were buying new clothes. So, in 1929, when the market crashed, my father was already in serious trouble. The woman that had the mortgage on our building, Mrs. Lasky, she owned a funeral parlor, and she said to my father, she said, then she said, I will never take your home away from you, and I won't take your business away from you, but what will happen the day I die, I cannot guarantee. I cannot tell you what my children will do. Well, the day she died, her daughter came over and foreclosed on our building.
That I didn't know.
Yes. And then my father was in trouble. He was older already. And he went and he rented a store next to the building that he lost. And just barely got along. And at this point, let me take my hat off to my brother-in-law. Your father wrote me a letter, I guess Rhea, Mike and Rhea wrote me a letter and said, at that point my father had his first heart attack. I mean, this whole situation just overwhelmed him. He was tired and overworked and worried, and he had a heart attack.
What year would that have been?
I don't know. What? I don't know.
Had it been in the 30s.
Probably. And don't forget, I was still in high school. I wasn't,
Working.
couldn't help it anyway. So Mike and Rhea sent me a letter, and they said that they would send my father $100 a month, and I thought that was really a wonderful thing to do. So I paid homage to my brother-in-law, and my father, well, then he had to give up that little store. Oh, and when the building was foreclosed, we moved over to Attorney Street, and my eyes opened because in the house on Division Street there was no steam heat. We had a coal stove. There were no bathroom facilities. Well, there was a bathroom,
Yeah,
but
there was a bathroom, there's nothing else in it.
but the bathtub was in the kitchen. I mean, it was a very difficult life. He did the best he could. But when we went over to, we lost the building and we got this 5-room apartment on Attorney Street, I jumped for joy. It was steam heated, I had a bathroom, I had my own room. Everything was wonderful. Of course, I mean, there wasn't too much money because at that point already my father was a sick man and I was a young girl just starting out, not making very much. So this $100 a week really helped us go along. And then my father got his Social Security. And then I started, very slowly to earn a little bit. And, well, I'll backtrack a little. The only way I helped was I couldn't give money into the house, but when my father had to pay the taxes, if I had a little money in the bank, I just handed it over, And then as I started to go up a little, I helped a little bit more. I paid the medical bills. I wasn't going to write every time I needed a doctor to my sister, So I took care of that end of it. And that's the way we went along until he died.
Okay, now go back and talk about your mother and the sister.
Okay. A nice thing that my father did, I think about the time, I think about the early, sometime in the 1920s, he brought over my father's two sisters. One was about 31, one was about 33,
Yeah.
Sylvia and
No.
Nellie. The others, I don't know, they came over on their own. I have no knowledge. And these two girls, they lived with us for a little while, but they weren't happy because my mother was a very Orthodox woman, and they were not, see. So they left us. And they went up to the Bronx and lived with one of the sisters there. And then one got married, and
Now these were your mother's sisters?
my mother's sisters, and those two got married. But my father brought them over here. Then my father died in May 1954. And the day we got up from Shiva, Rhea was
Morning,
there.
yeah.
Morning. Rhea was there. I was living in this 5-room apartment by myself. No, my mother was with me, but I wanted to better myself. Was it one? Yeah, that's right, 1954. I wanted to better myself. I was making a little bit more money, and I was a young lady, you know. I had to have something. So there was a cooperative building being built about 10 blocks down. And I said to my sister that I wanted to move out. So we went over to this building. It wasn't up yet. They just had the foundation down. And I walked into the office and I said I'd like to have a 3.5-room apartment. So they offered me one, and I signed up for it.
Well, we sent the money for,
No, I paid for it. I paid totally. No, you don't know. I put down a $100 deposit. 2 weeks later, I put down $18.75, and but sometime later, I paid in the $21.87. I paid for it completely. I never asked you for money. So my mother, he died in May 1954. By December 54, I couldn't handle it anymore. She was senile, and I had to go to work. I couldn't, what could I do? So we put her in a home, and that was when Mike paid for the nursing home.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. And he said to me, we will take care of it, but you have to take care of yourself, which is perfectly all right with me. And I did. And I lived there. I'm still living there.
I'll tell you a cute incident that happened. I used to send, my husband and I used to send money every week or every month to help her.
Oh, yeah.
And she used to get those checks. She used to get those checks, and instead of cashing them, she kept them in a box, all tied up.
Grandma Sarah.
Yeah. And we wondered why we weren't getting the checks back. So I don't remember exactly. Shortly after that, I went to New York, and I asked her about it. I made it my business, to ask her what happened to those checks, because she didn't understand. We couldn't balance our checkbook and everything. She comes out with a box, a shoebox. The checks were all in there, tied around, and I said to her, Mother, these checks I sent you so you'd have money to live on. And I said, why didn't you use them? And she says, no, she said, I was very, very happy to have the feeling to know that my children were helping me. They wanted to take care of me. And so she was saving those checks. And I tried to explain to her afterwards, what it was all about and what she was doing and everything. No. So after that, we used to mail the checks to my father.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when I would deposit them or cash or whatever I did. I don't know.
She
Yeah.
says, thank God, it just made me feel good to know that my children were taking care of me.
Well, my mother, if you want to know about her,
Yeah.
was, I think she was a great lady.
Yes, she was.
She
Yes, she
was.
was. In her own religious way, she was very kind-hearted. Her children always came first. She tried to do the best she could, but being a foreign type of a woman, you know, she never changed. From the day she got off the boat at Ellis Island to the day she passed away.
She,
She tried to do her best that she could.
during the Depression, my very best girlfriend was being dispossessed from her apartments. So my mother went in to Mr. Kaplan. There was one big business on our street. And she went into him and she said, Mr. Kaplan, she said, I can only do so much, but there is a family on this street, the Sherman
Yeah.
friend. There is a family, very nice people, are going to be put on the street today. And would you be able to help? Well, he didn't know about it, see, and he went and gave my mother a month's rent, and he went out and bought food, and my mother brought it up, put it outside the door, and he paid the rent, and they were able to live there for another month until they could find an apartment. Very charitable in her
She
own
would go
way.
out of her way to help other people. And in their home, in her own home,
She had nothing.
She had nothing. But
Right,
if anyone needed help, she was right there to help them. You better do something with your machine. It's going. We're at a standstill. There were so many. Great-grandpa I came into the office, and he saw my husband Mike sitting there downhearted with a, you know, and he says, what's wrong? And so he handed him the slip of paper. He says, the bank's calling in a loan, and we don't have the money to pay it. So he says, just hand me the keys. He took the keys and he went to the bank.
Which bank was it?
Southside Business Bank, and it was it Pat Ward or his father? Pat Ward. He went over to him and he said to him, have you ever been in the scrap business? He says, no. And he threw the keys to him. He says, well, you're in the scrap business now. He says, you send us a note and we can't meet it. So he said, we want a clear bill of health for the business, for my son, for everyone. And he says, here, he says, you're in the scrap business. So, of course, Pat Ward, he was a very close friend. He says, wait a minute. He says, we will make some arrangements. So they got to talking, and Grandpa,
Right.
no, Grandpa, great-grandpa, Isaac, said to him, I'll put you on our weekly payroll. And he said, I'll give you $50 a week until we pay this out. And that's how this incident ended. Okay, you better turn it off
Now, wait a
because I
minute, wait a
can't
minute.
recall any.
Grandpa Ike started the Talmud Torah.
Oh yeah.
He used to, then Grandpa used to go to each of the houses and pick up the kids and then bring them together and give them
Yeah.
some
Well,
candy
the
and teach
children
them.
weren't coming to the town, to the Talmud Torah. The parents weren't too interested, and they didn't want to be bothered. So he used to go after school and pick up the children, take them to the Hebrew school, and that's how it was just a one-room school. And from there on, that's how the Peoria Hebrew School started, with Grandpa Isaac taking them home. incident
You're not on, don't worry, so just recall all that.
where this Mr. Hines was a carpenter. And it was during the Depression. He couldn't get a job. He was out of work. And he came to my husband, Mike, and he told him, he said, look, he said, I've got 4 children. He says, I can't get a job. I'm out of work. He used to do all the carpenter work for us and everything. And he says, I want to come and work for you. He says, I don't want no salary. All I want you to do is just give me enough money to feed my children.
Lucas Hines.
Lucas Hines. And so Grandpa Mike put him to work, and he paid him $15 a week so he would have enough money to take care of his family.
Oh, it did.
And he never forgot what was done to him. And he always worked, you know, did odd jobs, carpenter in the home and everything. And he never wanted to take any money from us because he never forgot the kindness of my husband.
What did, now, and Grandpa Mike had called you up and asked you if you could live without another $15 a week?
Oh yeah, he asked me if I, you know, he told me of the incident, and he asked me if I could live with, take off the $15 from my small income that he gave me to live on. And I said, definitely, because I said, we'll manage somehow, one way or another. And the Bork family, all of them, had a good, kind heart, and they were always willing to help anyone that was down. Even if they couldn't afford to, they would still go out of their way to help them.
Grandma Fanny used to go out and raise money selling tickets.
Yeah.
What was the story
My mother-in-law, Grandma Fanny, used to go down to, you know, go downtown, meet the friends and everything, and she'd say, give me a $10 bill or give me something. She would never say, you know, they knew that it was for charity. And they always, it got to the point where before she had a chance to approach her friends for money, they would dig right down in their pocket and give it to her.
She's always selling tickets for something.
Because, you know, they knew that it was for a good cause, for a charitable cause. It was really funny the way they used to do that. They slipped the hand right in the pocket and handed them before she even asked them. Hills, you know where that is. And Grandpa Mike would go that way to and from his place of business. And he noticed that the foundation was laid for this Baptist church, and all of a sudden they quit working. And he wondered, you know, it kind of bothered him, and he called up this preacher, and he said, come down and see me, I want to talk to you. And he came down to the office, and he said to him, whatever happened? He said, the church isn't being built. And he says, we just don't have the money to build it. And so Grandpa Mike wrote out a check for $500 and gave it to him. And he said, I don't want anyone to know about this, that I've given you money, because that, in our religion, true charity is to help and not to talk about it, you know, or advertise it. And this preacher would not accept it. He said, no. He says, I want this written up. He said, and maybe that'll be the start of something. And he said, otherwise I'm not taking the money. So he had no alternative, let him do it. And there was an article written, he went to the Journal, and they wrote it up, and from then on donations started coming in, and they built that church. You don't dare tell my son. I told him it was a secret of something. He had to blab it right out. You've got the machine going, there's no sense believing it. Huh?
It was in the 1930s.
I don't know. I wanted to drive a car so badly, and my husband would not let me drive a car. He felt that he didn't want to teach me. He felt I would take the children and we'd have an accident and hurt the children or something or other. And so I just dropped it. But then he was out of town one day, and I called up a close friend of his, Dave Goldman, and I said to him, he knew about me wanting to drive a car and that my husband didn't want me to. So I said to him, Mike is out of town for the weekend. And I says, I got to learn how to drive a car. Do you have anybody, he was a newspaper distributor. I said, do you have anybody that can teach me how to drive a car over the weekend? It's worth a $10 bill. And that's going way, way back. And he says, Rhea, he said, I can't do that. Mike's a friend of mine. And I says, you've always said I was a friend of yours too. So I had him there at the moment. So he called out at his office where they bundled the newspapers and distributed and everything. He says, is there anybody there that can teach a friend of mine to drive a car over the weekend? And this guy said, yes. He says, I have a brother that isn't working. He said, it's worth a $10 bill. He said, I have a brother who isn't working. He's responsible. He'll teach her. So he came out, and we, it had to be over the weekend because Mike was gone. Otherwise, I couldn't have access to the car. And he took me out for 2 days. The third day, I couldn't wait for him to come. And we lived on a boulevard street, so I thought, well, I could just go around the first end of the boulevard street. I couldn't back the car out of my garage, so I had my neighbor, he came by, Fredman, and I says, will you back my car out? He says, is it all right? I said, look, don't give me an argument. I'm learning how to drive. Just back the car out for me. So he backed the car out for me. And I took the car around the first end of the boulevard. And as I got around the first end of it, I guess I didn't handle the car very good, and I went right up to the curb. And I was smart enough to put my foot off the gas pedal and put the brake on. Well, the bus went on that same corner where I lived, and this guy that was teaching me to drive got off the bus, and as he got off the bus, he looked across the boulevard street, and it looked to him, there was a tree there that I had backed into the tree, and I was in trouble, and he started running. And when he came to, I was sitting in the car, and I was hysterical. I was laughing. It struck me so funny. And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he says to me, do you take the car out yourself? And I said, no, I had my neighbor back it out. And I thought, well, just around the boulevard, I can make it until you come. And he says, you know something? He says, I don't think you need any more lessons. He says, I think you know enough to handle it by yourself.
But you tore the doors off of the garage.
Oh, well, that was another incident.
Oh.
That was another incident where I tried backing out the car from the garage, and I was just learning, and so I pulled the doors off the garage, and well, then I said to the kids, let's not tell Daddy anything about this, you know. When he comes, we'll ask him, you know, we'll tell him. No, when he comes, he was gone for the weekend, and when he comes the next day, we will drive down to the place of business, and we'll honk the horn, and we'll go this way to him and keep going. See? So that's what happened. Well, we were about to do that, you know, but I have a son that if you tell him it's a secret, forget it. He'll blab it right out. And when my husband came home from the weekend, he was at a Legion meeting. We were all sitting on the bed, and we all decided we weren't going to tell him anything. And then the next day, we were going to take the car and go down to business and go by and just do this to him, you know. And the closet was opposite the bed, and all the three children were sitting. And my son says, "Daddy, Daddy, you know what? You know what, Daddy?" And my oldest child was pinching him to shut up, and so he turned around and he said, Yeah, he said, I know all about the car and everything. And I said, and so what are you going to do about it now? He said, well, I guess I'll buy you a car in the morning.
Now, what about, now how did you get your citizenship, though?
Well, trying to think.
You read about you in the,
Well, you know, I was never an American citizen because my father always took out he went as far as his second papers, and then he'd drop it somehow or other. I just don't remember that incident very well. But,
When you married Mike.
yeah, when I married Mike, he didn't know that I wasn't an American citizen. And so one day when it was we were ready to vote for what we were voting for that time, president or something, I don't remember. And he said to me, I have to take you down to City Hall to register so you can vote. And I said to him, I'm not an American citizen. Because my father got as far as the second papers and he always dropped it. And he said, if I knew, he says, you weren't an American citizen, I'd have never married you. But he says, you have to come down anyhow to City Hall. I had no trouble getting my papers because I was the wife of a man that served in the service. So all I had to do was go down the day that to be sworn in. I didn't have to write any papers or whatever. What do you do when you become a citizen? You have
it's
to
sworn in.
No, but then there was papers to be made out of
Citizenship
something.
papers.
Citizenship papers. But all I had to do was just go down the day to be sworn in. And then it was in the newspapers. And boy, was he ashamed of the fact that everybody came and congratulated him, and he was so embarrassed. The children talked me into it. I never was a lover of dogs, and my children talked me into
Brought
it.
one home.
So we decided, my husband, a farmer brought in, that's what happened, a farmer brought in a beautiful collie dog to the place of business, to our junkyard, and he said he couldn't, for some reason or other, he couldn't keep it anymore. Would he know anybody that would like a good dog? He was housebroken and everything, you know. And so my husband called me up, would I take the dog? Because the children always wanted a dog. And first I reneged it a little, and then I decided, well, the children like the dog. They promised me they would take care of it. I wouldn't have to do a thing for the dog, just so they had a dog. They would feed him and they would do everything. And so I weakened, and he brought the dog home. And got along pretty good, because for a few days at least, they would feed the dog in the morning before they went to school, and they would take him out and everything went fine. One morning they rushed off to school, and they forgot to feed the dog, and I felt sorry for the poor dog. So I started feeding him and everything, and then one day I walked into the kitchen and the dog was sick, very sick. He made a mess all over the kitchen and everything. And I called up my husband and I said, you take that goddamn dog out of here. I'll clean up the shit of a baby, but I'll be damned if I clean up this dog. And he came out, he took care of the dog. And I think we gave him away after that, didn't we? That was the end of our dog story.
No, he had it here yesterday.
Oh, that's right.
I'll run over with him.
Well, we'll go to dinner about 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Chinese, oh,
Well,
you
we'll go
want
to
Chinese?
Chinese if you don't
Chinese.
like it.
Grandma, Rhea.
Is that all right, Anthony? Chinese?
Beautiful day.
Yeah.
Grandpa Mike.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna go with the dog and we'll be back.